The idea of being buried alive is the most horrifying that can obsess the human mind. Marquis de Sade. Buried alive. Darkness. It didn't just surround him. It sank into his skin, thick as tar, flooding his eyes, his mouth, his ears. He opened his eyes, and nothing changed. This wasn't the darkness of night where there's always a glimmer of the moon or a distant flicker of a street lamp. This was darkness that had never known stars. He tried to draw a deeper breath and felt the stale, suffocating air scrape down his throat. There was something sticky in it, the smell of damp wood, cheap varnish, and old earth. Panic crushed his chest. He stretched out his hands. His fingers met the rough surface of wood, first above him, then to the sides. The wood was smooth in places, splintered in others, the shards biting into his skin. He froze, his mind still fogged by sleep or what, refused to accept the obvious. But the answer came before he could resist the thought. He was in a coffin. His heart erupted into a furious pounding. It felt as if his chest would split open and merge with the muffled echo around him. He thrashed, struck upward with his fists, only to hear a dull thud and a faint creak. A coffin, real, shut tight. His lips whispered on their own, "No." But the sound was so pitiful it seemed the darkness swallowed it whole. He struck again. His knuckles met the wood, dull, like a fist landing on a dead man's chest. Pain flared, then scurried through his veins like a frightened mouse. He hit again, harder, faster, until he realized that every movement was devouring the air, the way fire devours paper. The boards wouldn't give. They only answered with a dry, spiteful creak, as if they were laughing. He felt along the lid, found a small metal nail, its head barely jutting out. He tried to pry it up with his fingernail, and the nail split with a sickening crack. Blood seeped into his mouth, warm, with the metallic tang of a rusted coin. He swallowed instinctively and only then realized how few swallows were left in here. Left wall, right wall, the smell of varnish and dampness, like in a cheap, hastily built wardrobe. A useless thought flashed in his head. Who made this coffin? Were they in a hurry? Take a pause, he told himself. Don't break down. Calculate. He bent his knees. They immediately jammed against the lid, as though the coffin had shrunk, pulled in on itself. The boards above him groaned, and the groan sounded like a whisper. Don't move. He tried to scream. Air bunched in his chest, shot upward, then collapsed somewhere under his tongue. The scream came out short, hoarse, and died at once, smothered as if under a wet rag. The silence after was even thicker. He could almost feel it with his fingers, thick and greasy, like cold fat. He forced his breathing into rhythm. Short inhale, long exhale. Each second a step across thin ice. Another punch at the lid. Again. His fingers burned with splinters. His knuckles grew sticky. Something shifted above. He froze. The sound was strange. Not heavy, not hollow, not like footsteps. More like a faint tapping on thick fabric, as if claws drummed lightly on carpet-covered ground. He strained to listen and understood only one thing. Something was up there. People, workers, a bird, a mole. He hammered again, this time in rhythm, an SOS, remembering some old movie rule. By the third series, his fingers cramped and his temples throbbed so hard it felt like his own skull was begging him to stop. No answer. Only a soft, almost tender rustle above, as if a finger traced the lid before moving on. He searched for hinges. His fingers found the edge of the lid by his head, a narrow slit, barely wide enough for a nail. He wedged a finger in, pushed. Skin scraped against jagged wood, cold pain needling beneath his nail. He pulled until he realized it was his finger that would rip free, not the lid. So he braced his shoulders, strained his neck, and rammed upward with the crown of his head. A creak, a sigh from the wood, and nothing. Again, again. Each time the world poured the same merciless truth on him. There was nowhere to go. His breath turned into a rough saw, back and forth, back and forth. His lungs felt crowded, as if someone had poured warm sand inside them. He tried to calm down, to listen to his body. His heart hammered so fast the beats blurred into a drone. Sweat beaded on his forehead, trickled down his temples, tickled his ears. He wanted to wipe it away, but the space answered with his elbows knocking wood. There was no room for anything but lying still. He slowly ran his palms across the lid, as if stroking someone's back. His fingers brushed against a small sticker, thin, flat, almost weightless. He found a corner, tried to peel it. Nothing. But the feel of paper sent a shiver through him. Out there in the light there were letters, names, a price, a price. Such a blunt, square, cynical marker for his whole universe now. He tried to scream again, and suddenly his voice cracked into something childlike, high, helpless. Shame washed over him for a moment, as if someone had heard that childish wail and smirked right into his ear. "Hey," he rasped, not a scream but a plea. "I'm here." Above, another rustle. For a second it seemed like someone gently tapped in reply. Once, his heart leapt like a fish in a net. He pounded the lid, babbled, begged, spat out everything that came to mind. Names, addresses, broken fragments of words. As if a dictionary could replace air. Silence. Then, another faint little knock from above, and nothing more. Nausea rose in him. He swallowed, dragged in air, already warm, used, thick with lacquer dust. A dull ache spread in his back, low, near his kidneys. His body was keeping count. How long had he been here? 10 minutes? Half an hour? An hour? An hour was far too long. Half an hour was already dangerous. Time had become shadows all the same. He switched to ration breathing, counted 1, 2, inhale, 1, 2, inhale. On each one, he listened for footsteps above. On each 2, he listened to himself. Was he slipping under? Again, something scraped across the lid, longer this time. He clearly heard it, scree like a fingernail dragging over glass. And for the first time, the thought came. These weren't people, not workers, not birds. He tried to push it away like you push away the edge of cold water with your foot. But it stayed, lurking close like a shadow. "Please," he whispered to the lid, and the lid said nothing. The silence came alive. Out of it were born sounds that hadn't existed a second before. To the left, a faint snuffling. To the right, a barely audible whisper like someone speaking very close, but not in his language. He twisted his head toward his right ear. Nothing there, but the emptiness was damp. A thin trickle of sweat crawled down his skin, and in that movement there was something disgustingly human, like a finger tracing him. He squeezed his eyes shut, though it made no difference here, and tried to recall something neutral. A kitchen in the morning light, a mug with a crack, the smell of coffee. But memory only answered with a funeral hall, candelabras, heavy drapes, faces like masks, and him, standing in the corner, a stranger at his own end. He remembered someone laying cold fingers on his chest. "Still warm," a woman's voice had said. He had wanted to joke. For how long? But the joke stuck in his throat. Now the jokes were over. Above him, something scraped again. long, patient, with pauses, as if someone were testing. Was it thicker here than before? He realized he was no longer listening for people, but for the intention of the sound. And the intention was simple: to get to him. His heart made an extra beat, then skipped the next. The world tilted for a moment. In the dark, like an upside-down aquarium, bubbles rose, images in his mind. Childhood, the smell of mothballs in a closet. His fear the door would slam shut. Teenage years, an elevator stuck between floors, and him laughing so no one would see the panic. Adulthood, closed doors, polite, we'll be in touch, keys on someone else's ring. His life had always spoken one word: later. Now later had turned into never. He lost time again. At first it seemed the darkness was lightening, but it was only his eyes inventing gray shapes to keep him sane. Then he felt the coffin floor breathing, subtly springing under him. Was he alive at all? Or lying still, dreaming he was lying still? "Hey," he said again, and listened to his own voice. There was an echo that couldn't exist here. The whisper repeated after him. "Hey." He understood. The echo was in his head. And yet the rustles were real, very close, as if the earth above him sometimes collapsed, sometimes drew tight again. He imagined tree roots, black wires sinking down, searching for water. Imagined them probing the coffin, wrapping it, testing it with their teeth. And the thought didn't seem the worst. Roots didn't care if you were alive or not. They just did their work. What was worse, up there someone was listening, and sometimes answered with a faint, tiny tick. Not a knock, not a thud, but a tick, like a tiny metal bead striking glass. A clock. Number. Too deliberate, too directed. He began to talk. Words crowded in his mouth and leapt out in short, hot lumps. He told about the morning, about the crooked beam of sunlight in the window, the plate with a crust of bread, the call he wanted to make. To someone important. And didn't, as always. He talked so he wouldn't remember there was nothing to breathe. Above, silence, and the tick. At first, once a minute, or so it seemed. Then more often, or less. Time spun out of control like a broken alarm clock. Suddenly, a sting burrowed beneath his shoulder blade, sharp, thin, like a steel fish darting inside. He jerked, hissed, but there was no room to move. The boards and his skin had become one. He stared into the void, and in the void a blotch appeared, like an old photograph in Developer. Brighter, brighter, until it looked like an eye staring up at him from below. Calm down. He clenched his teeth so hard they squeaked. The blotch vanished. Only the throbbing in his temples remained, Morse code that no one would read. "I'm here," he said again. I'm still here." The sound he dreaded most answered him. A breath by his right ear. Slow, like a wave, too close. He turned his head, his temple pressed against the wood, the plank cold against his skin. The breath did not vanish. "Who?" he asked, his voice unrecognizable. No reply, only a spasm in his throat, as if someone invisible had hooked a thread through him and tugged. He tried counting to 100, then 1,000, but lost track at 15. It seemed as if some new smell had been slipped into the coffin. Fresh, grassy, like someone had opened an invisible window and let in the stench of wet weeds. It came in waves, and each wave brought drowsiness. He jerked awake, slammed his head against the lid to keep from falling asleep. He couldn't. Sleep was a crack through which the silence would crawl in with joy. Above, again the tick. This time he heard another, slightly delayed. 2 ticks, like 2 fingers tapping the lid. And then, very softly, very clearly, in his left ear. "Don't try. The voice was his, and not his. He heard in it the tone he used when he told himself later. The tone he used to put off everything that mattered. "Shut up," he whispered. "Stay. Shut up." He slammed his fist. The pain exploded white, and for a moment the dark really grew brighter. But it wasn't hope, just snow blindness, the scream of nerves. The breath at his right ear was gone. The varnish smell returned. The damp returned. Fatigue grew thick, like molasses clinging to every movement. He realized his strength wasn't leaving in a rush. It was leaking like water through a crack, and with it, his focus. The rustles blurred into a single drone, like a far-off fan. He tried bracing his shoulders again, pushing, though he knew the end. His body strained, vertebrae cracked. The lid gave a dry sigh and stayed shut. A single tear, unbidden and childlike, slipped from his eye and soaked into the wood, as if it too were alive and could drink. He listened and realized the tick was gone. No rustles, no breathing, only him and his heart. His heart beat slower now, no longer a drum but a pendulum. Left back, right, forget. He whispered into the dark the last adult word he had left. Help. Darkness didn't care for pleas, it cared for facts. And the fact was, the air was growing warmer and thinner, and the coffin tighter and heavier, as if someone had sat on the lid and laid hands across his chest. He shut his eyes, just to pretend the world might change, and saw on the inside of his eyelids a tiny rectangle of light, ridiculous like a toy window. The light flickered like a candle in the wind. He reached for it in his mind like for an elevator button, and suddenly understood. The light wasn't outside, it was inside. Somewhere in memory, a door had been left ajar, letting through a sliver of day. He held that light the way one holds a breath underwater, and thought only one thing. Just a little longer. He clung to the light in his head as if it were the only lifeline. But the light wasn't a door. It was a memory. Childhood, summer. An ordinary day when everything felt eternal. Warm grass, bare feet, the laughter of neighborhood kids. He remembered the smell of sunlit dust, the crackle of grasshoppers in the field, and the way his vision shimmered in the heat. In that world there were no coffins, no darkness, only infinity. Even time itself moved lazily, as if promising that later would really come. He snapped back to the present, the boards, the cold, the sticky air. He curled in on himself like an animal in a trap. "I want to go back," he whispered, and his voice trembled not from tears, but from impossibility. Thoughts thickened, faces began to surface in them. His mother, whom he rarely visited, friends he always promised to meet up with sometime. That one girl to whom he had never said the single simple word. They were all beyond the lid, alive and far away. He realized now that no one would ever know what he had wanted, what he had feared, what he had regretted. It would all stay inside this wooden box, dissolving into the earth like a scent. He ran his hand across the lid again. His fingers found an old crack, rough, uneven, like a wrinkle on someone's face. He felt a strange tenderness for it, as though he were caressing the last living thing left to him. Maybe this is my last touch. The silence no longer frightened him. Now it felt like a tired companion, one who had heard it all and was simply waiting for the conversation to end. He understood. His body was still fighting, but his soul had already given in. The air grew thick like jelly. His chest rose with effort, each breath dragging him deeper into his own weight. It felt as though invisible hands pressed down gently from above, soothing, lulling him. Somewhere far away, he heard that same tick again. But now it wasn't threatening, it was calm, like a metronome. Left, inhale, right, exhale. He smiled, a faint, useless smile in the dark. How stupid. I always waited for later, and later came like this. He gathered what little strength he had left. His hand trembled, but he struck the lid once more with his fist. The sound was faint, like a slap against a pillow. No pain followed, only numbness. And then he thought the lid gave way. Just barely, but to the side a sliver of light flickered. Real light. Yellow, like a lamp in a window. His heart jolted and he reached toward it with his fingers. Yes, he breathed. The light wavered. He could already see himself breaking free, gasping for air, coughing, squeezing his eyes shut against the brightness. But his fingers met only smooth wood. The light was gone. He blinked and understood. The light was inside him. The last spark. The mind's final trick to keep him from losing himself. He exhaled, long, strained, and in that moment the thought came on its own. Maybe none of this matters anymore. He wanted to go on, to tell himself one last thing, a word, a sound, anything. The thought began to form, and broke. The silence closed in for good.